Unfortunately, today we have another story of police shooting of two, I was gonna say black men, but they're really kids, 16 and 18 years old, Angelo Crooms and Sincere Prince. They're both dead, and did they need to be shot? Well, I believe it's indisputable that they didn't. We're gonna talk about it. But first, I wanna show you the video. This is about a minute long. First, you'll see the police following them because they think it's a stolen car. Why do they think it's a stolen car? The police have not clarified yet, other than the fact that there were black folks driving it. Was it stolen? No, it was Crooms' girlfriend's car. And they just left their house. They're having a perfectly normal drive. They get pulled over, and then when they start to turn around is when the police panic. You'll see it, but I want you to pay attention to the very, very end of the video as the car makes the turn and the police continue to shoot. Let's watch. So this part of the video doesn't have audio. You'll hear audio later. This is from one of the police officers' cars. You see another police officer's car there in so-called pursuit, right? And then you will see Crooms and Pierce's car right there, the gray car. And then they're gonna pull into a driveway. Now, you're about to get the audio from the police cam in a second. And then they cut off the cam, and of course, others are asking for them not to cut it off.
Stop the vehicle! Stop the vehicle! Stop the vehicle! Stop! 1033. Stop the vehicle, goddammit! Stop! Stop! Shots fired! Shots fired!
How about you move. You don't have to murder the people in the car. All right, let me bring in an expert here. Charles Coleman Jr. is a civil rights attorney and a social justice advocate. Charles, unfortunately, we've seen scenes like this play out all across America far too often. And as you well know, it's not because this didn't happen all the time before. We just have video of it now more often. So what has been the reaction of the Florida Sheriff's Office, and do you think it's been sufficient?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Cenk. I appreciate it. The reaction of the Sheriff's Office has basically been to put these officers on paid vacation. They are on administrative leave with pay pending the outcome of the investigation, which I often find as a civil rights attorney to be extremely problematic, especially when you're talking about police violence, which has resulted in death. I don't understand why we are paying police officers with tax dollars to sit at home and be paid when there's evidence that clearly shows that there were alternative courses of action which could have been taken in order to avoid these officers ultimately committing, murder on camera.
Yeah, so there's a number of problems there. Number one, it reminded me a little bit of the Tamir Rice situation. So that's the 12-year-old kid in Cleveland. He had a toy gun, as almost all 12-year-old kids do, and he was in a park. Cops pull up off the curb. They get onto the curb, onto the grass. They drive right up to him and shoot him within 2 seconds without asking any questions. And by the way, it's not hyperbole. They shot him within 2 seconds flat. So there was 1,000 things they could have done not to shoot the 12-year-old kid. And in this case, there was 1,000 things you could have just moved aside. And so even if the car is stolen, is it a better remedy to kill the two people inside? Or is it a better remedy to continue to follow them? I mean, I remember when we had a celebrity, now in that case he was also African American, but O.J. Simpson, we had a slow speed chase for hours and hours and hours, right? But it's normal, poor, middle class folks, especially African Americans, in this context, shoot. Second, the car already swerved away from the police officer at the end of the video, it's super clear. They don't release the rest of the footage, and then they say, we had to kill him. It really didn't look that way, did it, Charles?
It did not. It certainly doesn't appear that way from a first glance look at this video, and I've reviewed it several times. Here's the thing, though. What we are talking about and what this sheriff's office would have to establish in terms of being able to, in any way, shape, or form, justify this shooting would be that this car was somehow threatening the lives in an imminent fashion of either of those two officers or some other individuals who are on the street. And there's nothing that shows that. And so what we are having a larger conversation here, I mean, of course, you've already illuminated the fact that there were clearly some alternative courses of action which did not involve shooting into that car, which could have been taken. But I think that on a larger level, this really speaks to the toxic nature of police culture in America that is consistent with over-policing in Black and brown communities, and also has weaponized Blackness in middle class and poor neighborhoods. And that's a real problem. And I think that we have, at this point in our nation, a very important conversation to have with the current administration, given where we are politically and everything that has just happened, about what is going to be done to finally address toxic police culture in America.
Yeah, and the answer is likely nothing, to be honest, and it's infuriating. So in that case, everyone in America, even the most right-wing person watching this, knows that if those are two white people in Beverly Hills, there's no way the cops assume they stole a car and then murder them based on that assumption. Right. There's no way. Everybody knows it. There's at a minimum different rules that even the right wing can agree to between the rich and the poor and how police treat them. And then obviously in the case of there's racial differences here. It's super obvious. So anyway, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I agree with you, but I also want to sort of go back to the first question that you asked, because I think that the point in the difference is not just necessarily how they handled it. The point in the difference is also the level of accountability. And I think that the two are incredibly related. When you ask the question about, well, how did the sheriff's office in Florida respond? I think that's part and parcel of a huge issue as to why we are where we are in terms of police culture. When it comes to the violation of Black bodies by police and law enforcement in America, there is no accountability. We've seen it time and time again. We've seen it over and over again. The system as it is between qualified immunity and other functions that are designed to protect police officers when they take these sorts of actions does not hold officers accountable in the same way as when officers are violent and exude violence among members of other communities. And so I think that that's a huge part of why we're having this conversation about the extreme difference between actions in one community versus actions in another community.
100%. So, but speaking of accountability, Charles, you heard my tone of pessimism there as we were talking about what's going to get done about toxic police culture. I couldn't agree more with how you framed it. I think the culture is the #1 problem. I think it's absolutely toxic and we should call it that. But how encouraged or discouraged are you about what the Biden administration might do to address that?
That's a great question, Cenk. And I think that the real answer is it depends on what Biden campaign shows up or what Biden shows up. Are we gonna get Joe Biden, who signed the 94 crime bill? Or are we gonna get Joe Biden, who campaigned in 2020 and said, I'm a different person, I've learned from my mistakes, and this is not who I wanna be. I also think that obviously his vice president, Kamala Harris, has a huge task in front of her in terms of dispelling some of the conversation around who she is as a former prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor, and I had my own reservations about Kamala Harris as a VP. And so watching this administration navigate the issue of criminal justice is going to be critical, because we're going to end up in a situation sooner than later where we're having another conversation about them and their records. So they've got to take this seriously, just in terms of setting the tone, right? Like Joe Biden wasn't someone who wanted to have a conversation about qualified immunity during the campaign. He's gonna have to address that at some point if he wants to be taken seriously on the issue of criminal justice reform. And Kamala Harris as well, especially being that she is a former prosecutor. So, my answer to you is, at this point, I'm very skeptical, because I don't know which versions of these people are gonna show up. Because we've seen, if we're being fair and we're looking at their records, we've seen a great level of disparity from both of them on the issue of criminal justice reform. And now is their opportunity to show us who they are in 2020 and finally seem to get this right.
So Charles, I think you made a great point there. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it that way. That especially given, I'll tell you my opinion. I don't think Barack Obama did nearly enough on criminal justice reform in his 8 years. And so given that Kamala Harris is almost certainly gonna run for president again, and given that there will be more pressure on her to deliver on this issue, perhaps that is a little bit of ray of hope that there'll be it. Not that we're hoping for them to do the right thing of their own accord, but that there'll be sufficient political pressure for someone like Kamala Harris to then push Joe Biden to take action in this direction. Otherwise, when in a Democratic primary, whether it's in 2024 or 2028, you would imagine that she would definitely be held to account on that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a real conversation that is going to have to light a fire under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, but more so Kamala Harris, because the common thought is that Joe Biden is not likely to do 2 terms in office, which then of course puts her directly in line. Of course, she will be primaried, but that cycle will start literally the day after midterms. So you're talking about 2022. From the start of January 20th in 2020 to the day after midterms in 2022, when people are going to start throwing their names in the hat for the Democratic primary. She has that small of a window to actually do something about criminal justice reform that's going to speak in large part to communities of color, to Black people in America. And that is a big deal. That is a tight window, and it's going to require very intentional action. There certainly should be the motivation of it in terms of wanting to maintain a presumable head start over the rest of the field. But the question is, how is she gonna use it? And whether she is going to be able to lean on Joe Biden in a way that's going to be meaningful and allow him to actually, or push him to actually make some of the changes that need to be made that they can enact from their seats in Washington. Because I do want to be clear that all police reform is not going to come from the federal government. It's not going to come from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I get that. But the bully pulpit, the rhetoric, all of that's very strong and important, and it has to come from somewhere. So if we're going to take you seriously as a candidate, we need to hear that you're actively having this conversation, not just when you're looking for votes.
That's 1,000,000% right. And it could start with something as simple as clarifying language, just like Charles said. Call it toxic police culture. That's exactly what it is, and it brings attention to the issue in the right ways. We'll see if they have the courage to do that. We're gonna find out together. All right, Charles, we're out of time, but I'm gonna ask you one more question anyway. So, as we see, unfortunately, Crooms and Pierce gunned down in Florida, Kyle Rittenhouse just got out on $2 million bail, partly put up by his fans, God help us, partly put up by Ricky Schroeder and My Pillow guy. So as you see that, then you see Cynthia Green, who took care of Sincere Pierce. That was his, and she was saying, "Please don't shoot my baby." As all of this went down, she's now doing I think she's cooking to try to raise money for the funeral. How do we deal with that disparity in this country?
I think that we have to have a very honest conversation about what it means to be in this country and what America is. I have said this before to great controversy, but in large part, America is a lie. America is a lie in as much as we would like to convince ourselves that we all have access to the American dream and this promise of better lives in ways that we simply do not. And there are people who are content to allow that to remain the case, as you see in terms of the disparity, in terms of how this is being dealt with. I can't tell you, in my career as a former prosecutor, the number of cases that were far, far less serious than Kyle Rittenhouse, where people received absolutely no bail whatsoever and were remanded. And yet and still, even at a high bail, because he was considered to be a high flight risk of $2 million, this man has celebrities who have never met him, who have come to his aid. He is, and that is, it speaks to a culture in America that is intended to shut other people out. It speaks to a culture in America that is intended to keep these disparities consistent and to maintain them. And I think that, for those people who are still in denial, who want to act as though we are further along than we are as a country in terms of where we would like to be or where we position ourselves or how we posture ourselves, I can think of no better example in contemporary history than what you just mentioned in terms of Kyle Rittenhouse and this bail situation as evidence of a disparity that we are simply not. We are lying to ourselves on a global scale, and everybody can see it besides us. And so that's the only way that I can really make sense of it. we have to be honest about the fact that this is as American as America gets. Not the ideal of America, but the reality. And I think that we have to really dig into that and be authentic in that conversation, because it says a lot in terms of what those differences are, but it's also extremely clear. So, that's where I am. I know we're out of town, but I really do appreciate the question.
Yeah, no problem. And look, I actually don't think it's that hard to square what you're saying. So we believe in the ideals of America, and we're realistic enough to know that we're not there yet. And so we want to push to get there so that we could have the America we all believe in, and so that it's not a lie.
Absolutely.
And that just shouldn't be too hard to comprehend, and it shouldn't be too much to ask for. So Charles Coleman Jr., thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed having me.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.